So here's a provocative way to look at biology. Imagine thinking of DNA not as our blueprint, but almost like a parasite, something not entirely different from Toxoplasma gondii. The idea is that DNA, in a sense, hijacks the minds of its hosts and pushes them to reproduce. Now, that might sound dramatic at first, but here's the interesting part. What you're really touching on is something close to the gene-centered view of evolution, just with a darker, more subversive twist. Normally, we talk about DNA as the instruction manual that builds and maintains our bodies. But if you step back for a moment, the idea of DNA behaving a bit like a molecular parasite isn't actually that far-fetched. Evolutionary biologists have been playing with similar ideas for decades. You see, there are several ways DNA behaves in a way that resembles a parasite, like Toxoplasma gondii. First, there's the logic of self-propagation. DNA doesn't really care about the happiness or long-term well-being of the organism carrying it. What matters, from the gene's perspective, is getting copied into the next generation. If a trait helps you reproduce but ends up harming you later in life, well, from the gene's point of view, the mission has already been accomplished. Then there's something that looks a lot like behavioral hijacking. Toxoplasma famously alters the behavior of mice, making them less afraid of cats so the parasite can complete its life cycle. In a somewhat analogous way, DNA equips organisms with powerful drives: hunger, fear, sexual desire, parental instinct. These impulses feel deeply personal, but they also serve a clear function: making sure the genetic code keeps getting copied. This connects directly to the famous idea of the selfish gene. Evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins argued that organisms are essentially survival machines, vehicles constructed by genes to ensure their own continuation. In that view, the organism is not the true center of the story. The genes are. We are, in a sense, the carriers, and DNA is the thing steering the process. And it gets even stranger when you look inside the genome itself. A large portion of human DNA doesn't code for useful traits at all. Instead, it consists of transposable elements, often called transposons. These bits of genetic material copy and paste themselves around the genome. Because their main function is simply to replicate themselves, scientists sometimes refer to them as genomic parasites. Now, of course, many biologists would push back on the parasite analogy. They might say that DNA isn't really a parasite, but something closer to an obligate symbiont. A parasite usually invades from the outside, like Toxoplasma entering a host organism. DNA, on the other hand, isn't an external invader. It's the fundamental internal structure that builds the organism in the first place. With parasites, the host and the parasite have separate identities and separate evolutionary fates. But with DNA, the host and the genetic code are tied together. They succeed or fail as one system. And then there's dependency. A host organism can sometimes survive after removing a parasite. But an organism cannot exist at all without DNA. In that sense, the relationship is much deeper. So if we insist on calling DNA a parasite, it would be the most successful parasite in history. After all, it has done something remarkable. It has convinced the host that they are the same thing. We don't simply carry DNA around, we are its living expression. And once you start thinking along these lines, another fascinating idea comes into view. It's called memetics. Memetics proposes that ideas behave a bit like biological parasites as well. Just as DNA uses bodies to reproduce itself, ideas use human minds. They spread from brain to brain through conversation, culture, and media. Sometimes they spread so effectively that people will sacrifice their own well-being or even their biological success for the sake of an ideology or belief. So, in a strange way, you could say that humans are hosts not only for genes, but also for ideas. And both of them are constantly competing for one thing: replication.